Hi, I'm Nat.
And I'm Guy.
This past Saturday, the 12th of February, we went to the Freedom Convoy in BC. It was a bigger protest than the last one we went to that we posted. And it was in solidarity with all the truckers in Ottawa. We thought it was actually going to be pretty small, but it spanned rows and rows and rows of cars and trucks. And it was pretty cool to see so many people gathered there after we saw just a tiny, tiny bit of people that on the Tuesday we went on February 8th. So the images you're going to be seeing are of that gathering, and basically we'll be telling you our thoughts on how that one went.
Yeah, it was at the Pacific border crossing, I believe?
Yes, Pacific border crossing.
It was actually a rather good time. It ended up being nice weather, amazing views out there. It's just really nice country, and man, the amount of people that were there were just amazing. It kind of seemed like the police were trying to break the protests up into multiple smaller protests, maybe so they could look smaller for photos and things, but they were 3 or 4 big major groups spanning from the border all the way up to multiple intersections.
Yeah, it seemed like they were trying to divide and then actually block some of the trucks that did show up. They were trying to block them from getting to the actual border crossing with the U.S. Some did make it up there, mostly pickup trucks though, and we'll have those images as well.
Seeing the police out there, a lot of the police didn't really seem to be too against the protests. They seemed to be somewhat supportive and just kind of doing their jobs.
Yeah, most of them were basically standing around on that day.
Yeah, they were in good spirits with the protesters. Police and protesters had a good camaraderie, I would say, overall.
Yeah, eventually we did make it up to where the border crossing, where the border line is with the states. And people just started singing the Canadian national anthem. And then some Americans actually came over the hill with flags. And
yeah, that was actually, it was kind of all inspiring. I've lived quite a few years in the States, and I've lived in Canada as well, and massive groups of Canadians just walked up to the border because they were being held back with their vehicles. But eventually, I'd say 1,000 or so Canadians got up to the border, and there was a bunch of Americans on the American side, and the Canadians started singing the American national anthem to the Americans, and the Americans started singing the Canadian national anthem to the Canadians, and it was just all inspiring. It was just people from 2 different countries uniting, and man, just seeing the diversity of faces out there, whether it was First Nations or African Americans or Canadians, white Canadians, black Canadians, or whatever it was just all groups of people, from white collar people to blue collar people to truckers to motorcycle shop owners. There was a little bit of everything.
Yeah, we even saw an Argentinian flag, so literally from the other side of the continent. I spoke to him, and he's been living here for 30 years, and he can't believe that it's turning into basically the dictatorships he escaped, both in Argentina and Chile. We actually talked about that. And we also ran into some Mexicans, and we saw Sikh people. There are a lot of Sikh truck drivers in BC.
Yeah, I mean, I guess a lot of people might not be aware if you're from other parts of Canada, but in BC, the trucker movement is a large portion Sikh. So they had Sikhs for Freedom giving out food, and from what I hear, the food was amazing. I wasn't able to get any myself, but I heard it was great.
And there was also a small stage set up a bit ways away from where the actual border crossing was, but they were also giving speeches. There were a lot of people gathered around that, music, people who were dancing. Like, it was a very lively, peaceful protest. Although most people were on foot because the police did put up a basically blockade so people couldn't get in with their cars after a while.
Yeah, I guess the protest started on Wednesday. They had set up a tent just to support truckers. They were handing out Tim Hortons and coffee to different trucks that would pass by. These pedestrians on the side of the road, just basically showing support for the truckers. And every day they were able to mount more and more people until Saturday. I was rather surprised the next day and that night to see just the absolute lies the mainstream media had propagated, not only about that protest, but protests across the nation.
Yeah, the one that continued in Ottawa, and then all the other ones that broke out in Toronto, in Quebec, all these small and big protests just in support of, it's not even just the truckers, it's in support of freedom and in support of keeping civil liberties and keeping the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
I guess overall we just want to stop having the government rule by decree and rule by law again and give us back our God-given freedoms, or the freedoms that were promised by law as Canadian citizens. But it's rather upsetting, a little bit disheartening to see Justin Trudeau's reaction to this stuff. I mean, he's declared not only a state of emergency now, but he's enacted the War Measures Act. And
on Valentine's Day, which is today, Trudeau declared the Emergencies Act, which is the basically new version of the War Measures Act, which Canada decided to change the name, and some of the features that it has, but it does strip away civil liberties and gives Trudeau even more power to enact or coordinate with both banks and provinces and the federal government to strip away any little hope that the truckers had to basically receive funding, to stay where they were, to have a meeting with him. Like, that's all they want. They want to have a meeting with him.
Well, he's got all the powers he needs. And this was proven when he broke up the bridge protest. He simply went in, got a court order. They went ahead and arrested a couple of protesters that weren't necessarily breaking the law. They were protesting peacefully, but according to this court order, they were allowed to arrest them. So nobody resisted. They were arrested peacefully, and the rest basically left.
And that was between Saturday the 12th and Sunday the 13th that they ended up breaking up the Ambassador Bridge protest. And basically the protesters moved to the side, and some stayed on foot, but the trucks did leave. They made, I believe, 2 arrests from people.
Well, the truckers have already stated they have over 1,000 lawyers. And they have millions of dollars ready to fight anything in court that anybody's arrested for, and that they will surrender peacefully. Mm-hmm. There will be no resistance, and I think this is what has the government somewhat baffled. They don't know how to deal with a Gandhi-style peaceful protest, in which this is. Yeah, you're blocking some roads, but that's exactly what Gandhi did back in India. And we know how Trudeau supports the Indian farmers, so why isn't he supporting the working class truckers now, or the rest of the... It's not just truckers. You're seeing medical workers, truckers, farmers, blue-collared workers. You're even seeing mariners out there, a lot of ex-police officers, retired police officers. A huge military movement is... within these convoys as well.
Military veterans.
Yeah, I mean, they just don't know how to deal with peaceful protests.
Yeah, and I think it scares him because that, for him and the NDP, who Jasmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP, has also given some horrible statements on what's happening. He is supposed to be the Socialist Party of Canada, the leader of the workers and the working class. He has also stated that they are basically terrorists, racists. They're the worst thing that could have happened. These protests are horrible. He has talked about incidents that have not been confirmed by police, but they have been confirmed by him and the media. And they've decided to blow these up, and they're not related to the truckers either, to the people within the protests, which has same as the flags. Flags that they found, where they only found 2 incidents of these flags, and then they could never find the people that were there. They left once the truckers started asking them to leave.
It's not even about defending what the media is saying at this point. The dirty little secret is, they're making arrests at these protests, but a lot of this is counter-protesters. The large majority of people that are being arrested are counter-protesters, and I can mention a few incidents here. We had attempted murder with one guy doing 4 hit and runs at one of the protests. People ended up in hospital. We had another guy grab a flag from a 13-year-old girl. All this is on camera. He stomps the flag saying, "Not in my city. You all need to leave."
This was
he eventually slipped on the ice, broke his ankle, and tried to blame somebody else for it. The police ended up arresting him. You're having 7 people get arrested, 5 of these people being counter-protesters. The 2 actual protesters in the Ottawa convoy that got arrested were simply bringing gas in, which, okay, you're arresting people that bring gas, but you're saying all these people are violent, and this protest is specifically nonviolent, and that's why they're winning, and they know that's why they're winning, and that's why everybody there knows they have access to lawyers and millions of dollars to defend themselves, and they're not going to get violent.
Yeah, and I believe they are trying to stoke the fires, because with cutting off the funding twice now, and now with the Emergencies Act a third time by asking TD Bank and other banks to stop any kind of funding that is being received, even through cryptocurrencies, they're going to start investigating those as well, which I don't even know if that's legal given how cryptocurrencies act and are supposed to
it's
act.
All legal now under the Wars Act.
That's the thing. Like, they're making all of these things that seem crazy and that seem completely against the law. They're making them laws. Like, they're basically enacting all of these things to rule by decree and to quash the protesters they're so scared of.
You're seeing stories of statues being desecrated. Now, let's be honest about this. They put a flag around the Terry Fox statue, and they put a hat on him. And once they said this statue got desecrated, they took that stuff off of them, and they polished them up and cleaned the statue up. And then they said somebody had pissed on the War Memorial statue, so basically they cleaned that statue and started putting 24-hour guards on there. The truckers did. So
well, they eventually put a fence up on it. Then the war veterans came and they took the fence off, and the police who were standing there said, "Oh, let's get the city to take away the fencing," and then they prayed and sang the national anthem on it.
Well, and then what happened today?
And here today in Vancouver, if any of you have been here, in Gastown, there is a statue of Gassy Jack, who has been controversial for a few years. But today on the Women's March for Indigenous Women and Girls and Two-Spirit People, and I don't know how many other adjectives they've added on to that, they have tore it down. First they painted it in red, and they tore it down. But
they basically tied a rope around its neck and yanked this thing to the ground. There's photos all over the internet on this, and this is one of the nicest statues in Vancouver. Now, I don't know the history on it, but if you're tying a rope around a neck of a statue and tearing it down and being congratulated by the government, much as Trudeau congratulated the BLM protesters when they were in Canada, I mean, I think
and
it's
the burning of churches.
Well, I think it's time to just swallow your pride and go talk to these truckers.
Yeah, with the Gassy Jack statue, I mean, the way they're justifying it is that it was believed, not yet confirmed, that he was married to a 12-year-old Indigenous girl, and then she ran away, and she became this symbol for other women who want to run away from like difficult.
There's ways to get things done, and then there's ways to not get things done. And breaking the law and tying a rope around a statue and bringing it to the ground is not the way to get things done.
Well, especially so close to them having called putting a hat on a Terry Fox statue a desecration and smear to national pride. Like, you can't make these equivalencies and then celebrate one and admonish the other one when one is complete actual desecration and tearing down of a statue, and the other one is putting a flag and a freedom little sign on his arms.
Well, crime in Ottawa in the downtown core is down 50% since the truckers moved in. Mm-hmm. And this has a lot to do with the truckers, because the truckers are pulling security, are icing the sidewalks, and are calling police when people are violent or anything else.
And they're feeding homeless people, and they're helping the community, and they have bouncy castles. Like, I still find it crazy that the mainstream news talks about bouncy castles in the same sentence as they talk about violence and terrorism happening in downtown Ottawa. Like, the two don't go together.
Well, I mean, if Trudeau continues to lead this country down this path, we're going to have a big problem, because he's turning really good-hearted citizens that have never committed a crime in their life. He's trying to turn these people into domestic terrorists, and it's absolutely ridiculous. You're trying to get these guys a criminal record. You're trying to make sure they can't work again. You're trying to freeze their bank accounts. You're writing out their license plate and threatening their families. What do you expect these guys to do if they can't work and everything else later?
And that's the thing. The best thing they could do is just continue, because what's going to piss him off more? And like, what's going to make him realize that nothing he's trying to do works is for them to stay peaceful and for them to stay the way they've been this whole time. But it might come a time where what he's doing is so not grounded in reality and in the reality that most people are seeing in Canada.
It hasn't been grounded in reality for over a year now.
2
Come on.
years.
Science is not on his side anymore. He knows it, but he's got money to make and he's got globalists to please. So, I mean, I guess we'll see what happens, but I'm a lot more hopeful today than I was a year ago, because Canada was quickly turned into a communist country. But now it seems like Canada is on the front line of freedom, and it's very inspiring.
It is. And even with the Emergencies Act being passed today, I think, as Viva Fry said today, don't interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake. And I think in the international eyes, and the international media's eyes, in most of Canadians' eyes, really, this might be the biggest mistake he's made, and I'm hoping it is.
I mean, Trudeau's hoping that people stand up and fight for freedom, but the truth is, we know we don't have to fight for freedom. All we have to do is stand up in unity and be peaceful, and we will get our freedoms back. The worst thing we could do is fight or do something violent at this point. Is we just stand together in unity and request our freedoms back, and it's going to happen more and more and more. These guys are protesting in negative 30-degree weather, and I've been in that kind of weather. It is not easy. You don't see BLM, you don't see any other protests worldwide happening in temperatures like this ever. This is the first time I've ever witnessed it, and as the weather heats up and the summer months come, I think we're going to have what's going to be known as the Summer of Freedom, where people are going to demand their freedoms back, not just in Canada, but the U.S. and around the world.
And it's already started. Like, we keep seeing these protests coming up internationally, and the way in which their governments react to them will speak volumes, and will hopefully make more and more people around the world and in Canada realize that the side of history you decide to be on is completely up to you and completely up to who you support.
Well, and I just like to put a personal note aside from all this, or not really aside from all of it, but when we started making this podcast, and it's, I don't necessarily want to be in the public eye or anything else, but this is a very important time for people to vocalize their support for freedom, and maybe a little bit of dissent from the government and mandates, and they need to speak up so people know that there are other people like you out there that do want freedom. So if you're thinking about speaking up or supporting a protest, or maybe even making some kind of video or podcast, I strongly urge you to do so. We need everybody out there voicing their opinions, and fighting for freedom, I guess you would say, or standing up for freedom.
Yeah, it's the time of living in fear, and in the fear that both of a government and other people want you to stay in. That time has passed, and standing up for what you believe in and the way you want to live the rest of your life is the most important thing you can do right now. We started going to small protests 2 years ago, and now we're seeing this movement actually become something that will lead us to where we want to be. Thank you. I'm Nat.
And I'm Guy, and we'll talk to you soon.